Everyone has a price. The only question is how much. The words landed softly, almost casually, yet they sliced through the warm hum of the restaurant like a blade wrapped in velvet. The soft clinking of silverware, the low murmur of conversations, the golden glow of hanging lights. Everything felt expensive, curated, untouchable. And yet Ava Bennett stood right in the middle of it all, gripping her order pad a little tighter than usual, her worn flats aching after a 10-hour shift, her apron dusted with flour and coffee stains that no amount of scrubbing ever fully erased. She didn't belong here. She knew it, everyone knew it, but she showed up anyway because rent didn't care about dignity and dreams didn't pay bills on their own. At table 12, the tension had already started building. A man sat alone, shoulders slightly hunched, his coat thin, his hair just messy enough to suggest neglect rather than style. He didn't look like the kind of customer this place welcomed. In fact, he looked like someone who had wandered in by mistake. Ava noticed the manager first, the tight smile, the stiff posture, the way his eyes narrowed as he approached the table. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the manager said, voice low but firm, the kind of tone reserved for situations that needed to disappear quickly. A few nearby guests glanced over, curiosity flickering in their eyes before being masked behind polite indifference. The man didn't argue. He simply looked up, calm, almost detached, as if he had expected this exact moment. Ava felt something twist in her chest. Maybe it was the way his hands rested quietly on the table, not defensive, not angry, just tired. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. "He's with me," she said, the words leaving her mouth faster than her fear could catch up. The manager blinked, caught off guard. "Ava, we have standards. And we also have open tables," she replied, her voice steady now, even though her heart pounded against her ribs. "He hasn't done anything wrong." For a second, everything froze. The manager's jaw tightened, the surrounding chatter dimmed, and Ava could almost feel the weight of every decision she had ever made pressing down on this one moment. Then, with a sharp exhale, the manager stepped back. "Fine, but this is on you." Ava nodded, forcing a small, polite smile before turning back to the man. "I'm sorry about that," she said softly, setting a menu in front of him. "What can I get you?" He studied her for a moment, his gaze sharper than she expected, like he was measuring something invisible. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick fold of cash. He placed it on the table between them. Not a few bills, not a tip, a statement. "Take it," he said quietly. "You need it more than I do." Ava's breath caught. The money sat there, impossible to ignore. It was more than she made in a week. Maybe two. Enough to cover rent. Enough to breathe. For a split second, her fingers twitched. She imagined the relief, the silence of overdue notices, the weight lifting off her shoulders. Then she looked at him again. Really looked. And something in her, something stubborn, something unbreakable, rose to the surface. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed the money back across the table. "No," she said. Not harsh, not angry, just certain. The man didn't move. His eyes locked onto hers, searching, testing. "Everyone has a price," he repeated, softer this time. Ava shook her head, a faint, tired smile touching her lips. "Maybe," she said, "but not everything is for sale." And in that quiet, almost invisible moment, something shifted, not in the room, not in the air, but in the way he looked at her, like for the first time all night. He wasn't seeing a waitress, he was seeing someone he couldn't buy. The money stayed on the table for a second longer than it should have, like it had a presence of its own, like it was waiting for her to change her mind. But Ava had already turned away, her pulse still racing as she forced herself back into motion, back into the rhythm of trays and orders and polite smiles that felt just a little tighter now, just a little more fragile. Because something about that moment had cracked through the routine she relied on to survive, and she could feel his eyes on her even as she moved between tables, even as she refilled glasses and cleared plates and thanked customers who barely looked at her twice. Because he was different, not just in the way he dressed or the way he spoke, but in the way he watched, like he was not here for food or comfort, but for something else entirely, something quieter, something harder to name. And when she finally returned to his table with a glass of water and the cheapest item on the menu already in mind, she kept her tone steady, professional, like nothing had happened, like there was not. A silent conversation still hanging between them. "Our soup of the day is tomato basil," she said, setting the glass down carefully. "And it comes with bread. It is $8, she added, because she knew what it meant to count every dollar, even if he had just tried to hand her more than she had seen in weeks. But he did not look at the menu, did not reach for the water, did not even glance at the prices. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying her again, that same unreadable expression settling across his face. "You are not curious?" he asked, his voice calm, almost gentle, like he was asking about the weather instead of testing the edges of her resolve. Ava paused, just for a second, then shook her head. "About what?" she asked, even though she knew exactly what he meant. "About why I would offer you that kind of money," he said. And there it was again, that quiet pressure, that invitation to step into something easier, something simpler. But Ava just exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the edge of her order pad before relaxing again. "People do things for their own reasons," she said, "and I do not need to understand all of them." And for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but something close to it, like she had answered a question he had not expected her to get right, like she had passed a test she did not even know she was taking. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the noise of the restaurant filling the space between them again, until he finally nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Then bring me the soup," he said, and Ava gave a small nod in return before stepping away, but this time, as she walked back toward the kitchen, she felt it, the weight of the night pressing down on her from every direction, because behind the steady rhythm of orders and dishes was the reality she could not ignore, the overdue rent notice folded inside her locker, the voicemail from her landlord she had not listened to yet, the text from her younger brother asking if she could help with his medication this week. And the numbers did not add up. They never did. Not even when she worked double shifts. Not even when she skipped meals to save a few extra dollars. And for a brief, dangerous moment, the image of that money flashed in her mind again. Crisp bills stacked neatly, an easy solution sitting right in front of her, and she had pushed it away, not because she did not need it, but because something inside her refused to let her take it like that, refused to let her become someone who could be bought in a moment of weakness. And as she ladled soup into a bowl, the steam rising around her face, she whispered, under her breath, almost like she was reminding herself, "You did the right thing," even though no one was there to hear it, even though part of her still wondered what it would have felt like to say yes. And when she turned back toward the dining room, carrying the bowl carefully in both hands, she saw him exactly where she had left him, sitting still, watching the room. But when his eyes met hers again, there was something new there, something quieter, something that looked a lot like respect, beginning to take root in a place where judgment had been just moments before. The soup was simple, nothing special, just tomato and basil and a slice of bread on the side. But Ava placed it in front of him with the same care she gave every table, like it mattered, like he mattered, even if no one else in the room seemed to think so. And as she straightened up, she noticed something small but strange. The money was still there, untouched, exactly where he had placed it, like it was not meant to be taken, like it was not even real in the way money usually was. And for a moment she hesitated, her eyes flicking to it, and then back to him. "You might want to put that away," she said quietly, leaning in just enough so no one else would hear. "This is not the kind of place where you leave cash sitting out like that." And he followed her gaze, then looked back at her, a faint, almost invisible smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I thought you were not interested," he said, and Ava let out a small breath, shaking her head. "I am not interested in taking it," she replied. "But that does not mean I want someone else to." And that seemed to land differently, not as a challenge this time, but as something steadier, something grounded. And he nodded once before finally reaching out and folding the money back into his coat, slipping it away without another word. And as he picked up the spoon and took his first bite, Ava turned to leave, but his voice stopped her again, softer now, less like a test, and more like a question. "Why?" he asked, and she glanced back over her shoulder, confused for a second. "Why what?" she said. And he held her gaze. "Why refuse it, when it would clearly make your life easier?" And there it was again, the truth laid out plainly, no judgment in his tone, just curiosity, like he genuinely wanted to understand. And Ava shifted her weight slightly, considering how to answer, because the easy response would be something simple, something polite. But the real answer was heavier than that. Because if I take it like that, she said slowly, then it is not help, it is control. And the words hung in the air between them, quiet but undeniable. And for a second he did not respond, did not move, just watched her like he was seeing something he had not expected to find, like she had just said something that cut deeper than she realized. And Ava felt her cheeks warm slightly, suddenly aware of how much she had revealed. So she gave a small, almost apologetic smile. Anyway, enjoy your soup, she added, turning away before the moment could stretch any further. But as she walked back toward the kitchen, she could feel it again, that shift, that subtle change in the way the night was unfolding, like something invisible had tilted just enough to alter the direction of everything. And behind her, at table 12, the man who had tried to buy her silence sat a little straighter, his expression no longer detached, no longer indifferent, but thoughtful, as if for the first time in a very long while, someone had said no to him and meant it, and it had not pushed him away, it had pulled him in. The rest of the night unfolded the way most nights did, with orders stacking up and voices blending into a constant stream of requests. But something had shifted beneath the surface, something Ava could not quite name, and every time she passed table 12, she felt it again, that quiet awareness, like she was being seen in a way she was not used to, not as background, not as service, but as something more. And it made her uneasy in a way she could not explain, because attention like that usually came with expectations, with conditions, with a cost she had learned to recognize early in life. So she kept her distance, kept things professional, kept her focus on the next table, the next task, the next tip that might help close the gap between what she had and what she needed. And yet, no matter how busy the room became, she noticed that he stayed, long after his bowl was empty, long after his glass of water had been refilled twice, just sitting there, watching the world move around him like he was trying to understand something he had never needed to understand before. And when the dinner rush finally began to thin, when the clinking softened and the tables started to clear, Ava approached again, this time with the quiet intention of closing out his check. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice steady, polite, distant enough to keep boundaries intact, and he shook his head slightly, his gaze lifting to meet hers. "No," he said, then after a pause, "But I have a question," and Ava hesitated for just a fraction of a second before nodding. "Okay," she replied, bracing herself for something she could not quite predict. "If you needed help," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "Real help, not just money on a table. Would you accept it?" And the question landed differently. Not like before, not like a test wrapped in cash, but something more deliberate, more considered. And Ava felt her guard rise instinctively, because she knew better than to trust easy offers, knew better than to believe in help that came without strings. "That depends," she said slowly, her eyes steady on his, "on whether it is actually help, or just another way to feel in control." And again, that silence followed, thick but not uncomfortable, like both of them were standing at the edge of something neither had fully stepped into yet. And for a moment, he looked almost thoughtful, like her answer mattered in a way that surprised even him. "And how would you tell the difference?" he asked, and Ava let out a small breath, glancing briefly toward the window where the city lights flickered against the glass, then back at him. "Real help does not make you feel small," she said, her voice softer now, not defensive, just honest. "It does not make you feel like you owe something you cannot repay." And as the words left her, she realized she was not just answering him. She was reminding herself, reinforcing a line she had drawn a long time ago and refused to cross. And when she looked back at him, something in his expression had changed again, deeper this time, like the weight of what she said had settled somewhere he did not expect, and he nodded slowly, almost to himself, as if filing it away, as if it meant something beyond this moment, beyond this restaurant, beyond her. And Ava cleared her throat gently, stepping back into her role. "I will bring your check," she said, turning before the conversation could stretch any further. But as she walked away, she could feel it again, that quiet pull, that sense that this was not over, that whatever had started at table 12 was not going to end with a bowl of soup and a closed tab. And behind her, The man who had come in looking like he did not belong sat in the fading light of the restaurant, no longer testing, no longer offering, but listening, as if for the first time in a long time, someone had given him something money never could. By the time Ava returned with the check, the restaurant had settled into that quiet, almost reflective state that came after a long night, when chairs were being stacked in the corners and the last few conversations drifted low and slow, like no one was in a hurry to leave, and she placed the small black folder gently on the table in front of him, her movements precise, controlled, the way she had trained herself to be when emotions threatened to slip through the cracks. "Whenever you are ready," she said, offering a brief, polite smile before stepping back, but instead of reaching for the check, he looked at it for a moment, then back at her, like the bill itself was the least important part of the exchange. "Ava," he said, and the way he said her name caught her off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it sounded intentional, like he had made sure to remember it, like it mattered, and she paused, her hand still resting lightly against the edge of the table. "Yes," she replied, keeping her tone neutral even as something in her chest tightened slightly. "Do you always do that?" he asked, and she frowned just a little. "Do what?" "Stand your ground," he clarified, his eyes steady on hers, and Ava let out a soft breath, glancing briefly toward the emptying room before meeting his gaze again. "Only when it matters," she said, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching just long enough to feel real, not awkward, just present, until he finally reached for the check, opening it slowly, almost absent-mindedly, like his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. And when he pulled out his wallet, Ava noticed it immediately, not because it was flashy, but because it was not what she expected. It was clean, simple, well-made, the kind of thing that did not try to prove anything. And as he placed a card inside the folder, he hesitated for a second, then looked back up at her. "If I came back," he said, his voice quieter now, less guarded, "would you treat me the same way?" And Ava blinked, caught between instinct and honesty, because the safe answer would have been something polite, something professional, but she had already crossed that line tonight, already stepped outside the script she usually followed, so she answered the only way she knew how. "If you are the same person," she said, "then yes." And something in his expression shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, like her answer had landed somewhere deeper than he expected, like it had confirmed something he had been quietly searching for, and he gave a small nod, almost to himself, before closing the folder and sliding it toward the edge of the table. "Then I will be back," he said simply, and Ava felt a flicker of something she could not quite name, not excitement, not fear, but something in between, something that made her aware that this was not just another customer, not just another night. And as she picked up the folder, she noticed the tip inside, not excessive, not overwhelming, just fair, respectful, exactly what the service deserved and nothing more. And somehow that meant more than the stack of cash he had offered before, because it was not a test, it was not a statement, it was just right. And when she looked up again, he was already standing, adjusting his coat, blending back into the quiet anonymity he had carried when he first walked in, and for a brief second, their eyes met one last time. No words, no gestures, just a silent understanding that something had begun here, something neither of them fully understood yet. And as he turned and walked toward the door, disappearing into the cool night air beyond the glass, Ava stood there for a moment longer than she should have, the empty restaurant around her, the soft hum of closing duties continuing in the background, and she realized that for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at her and seen not what she needed, not what she lacked, but what she refused to compromise, and somehow, that felt like the beginning of something far more valuable than anything money could have offered. The night ended the way all long nights did, with Ava stepping out into the cool air just past midnight. The city quieter now, the sharp edge of noise softened into distant traffic and flickering streetlights, and as she pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself, she exhaled slowly, watching her breath disappear into the dark, trying to let the weight of the evening settle into something she could understand, something she could file away as just another shift, just another customer. But it did not feel like that. It lingered, like a conversation that had not really ended, like a question that had not been fully answered. And as she walked the 3 blocks to her apartment, her mind kept circling back, Not to the money, not to the offer, but to the way he had listened, the way he had not argued, not insisted, just stayed. And that was what unsettled her the most. Because people who tested others usually wanted something in return. Something immediate, something clear, and he had walked away with nothing. Or at least that was what it looked like. And by the time she reached her building, the familiar sight of peeling paint and dim hallway lights grounded her again, pulled her back into reality, where rent was still overdue and tomorrow's shift was already waiting. And she climbed the narrow stairs, each step creaking softly beneath her feet, until she reached her door, unlocking it with a quiet click and stepping inside. The small space greeting her with its usual stillness, a single lamp casting a warm but tired glow across the room. And on the small table near the window sat the envelope she had been avoiding all day, the one she did not need to open to know what it said. And she stood there for a moment, her bag still slung over her shoulder, her body too tired to move, but her mind too restless to ignore it any longer. So she crossed the room slowly and picked it up, her fingers brushing over the thin paper. Before she finally unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words she had already memorized in her head. Late notice, final warning, 3 days, and she let out a quiet breath, closing her eyes for just a second, because this was the part no one saw. The part behind the steady smile and the polite voice, the constant balancing act between holding on and falling behind. And for a brief moment, the image returned again. That stack of cash on the table, so easy, so immediate, so tempting, and this time, it stayed a little longer, pressing against her thoughts with a quiet persistence. But then, just as quickly, it faded, replaced by something stronger, something steadier, the memory of her own voice. Saying no, not out of pride, not out of stubbornness, but out of something deeper, something she had built piece by piece over years of learning what it meant to stand on her own, even when standing felt impossible. And she placed the letter back down, smoothing it carefully as if that could somehow soften the reality it carried, before moving toward the small kitchenette, pouring herself a glass of water and leaning against the counter, staring out the window at the city beyond. And somewhere, in that quiet, in that space between exhaustion and resolve, a thought surfaced, unexpected and unwelcome, not about the money, not about the struggle, but about him, about the way he had said he would come back. And she found herself wondering, not if he would, but why he would, because whatever he had been looking for tonight, whatever he had been testing or searching for, it had not ended when he walked out that door. And as Ava stood there, the city stretching out in front of her, she realized that whether she liked it or not, something had already begun to change, not in her circumstances, not yet, but in the quiet, unseen space where choices were made, where lines were drawn, and where, for the first time in a long time, someone had challenged those lines and walked away respecting them instead of trying to break them. The next evening arrived with the same quiet determination Ava carried into every shift, her hair tied back neatly, her uniform pressed just enough to look presentable under warm lighting. And yet beneath that routine, something felt different, like the air itself held a question waiting to be answered. And as she stepped into the restaurant, the familiar sounds wrapped around her again, the low hum of conversation, the gentle clink of glass and silver, the rhythm she had learned to move within, without thinking. But tonight, she noticed everything just a little more, the door opening, the way people walked in, the brief flicker of anticipation she tried to ignore, because she did not expect him to return. Not really. People said things all the time, promises made in passing, intentions that faded the moment they stepped outside, and she had learned not to hold on to those things, not to build expectations on words that cost nothing to say. So she focused on her work, greeting guests, taking orders, moving from table to table with practiced ease, until, without warning, the door opened again, and there he was, not dramatically, not with any kind of announcement, just stepping inside like he had always belonged there. The same coat, the same quiet presence, but this time, Ava noticed something she had missed before, the way he carried himself. Not like someone uncertain or out of place, but like someone choosing to be here, intentionally. And when his eyes found hers across the room, there was no hesitation, no testing glance, just recognition. And for a second, Ava forgot to move, her breath catching slightly before she forced herself forward, closing the distance between them with steady steps. "Welcome back," she said, her voice calm, even as something inside her shifted, not quite relief, not quite curiosity, but something that felt like the beginning of understanding. And he gave a small nod, his expression softer now, less guarded than the night before. "I said I would return," he replied simply, and there was no edge to it, no hidden meaning, just a statement. And Ava gestured toward a table, not the one from last night, but one near the window, quieter, less exposed. "This way," she said, and as he followed, she became aware again of the way the room seemed to fade slightly around him, not because he demanded attention, but because he did not. And when he sat down, she handed him a menu, even though they both knew it was unnecessary, a small ritual to keep things normal, grounded. And as she stood there, pen ready, she asked the same question she always did: "What can I get you tonight?" But this time, there was something different in her tone, something less distant, less guarded, and he seemed to notice, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer before he answered. "The same," he said, then after a pause, "If that is all right." And Ava nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "It is," she replied, writing it down even though she did not need to. And as she turned to leave, he spoke again, stopping her, with a quiet certainty that felt different from before. "Ava," he said, and she glanced back, waiting. "I meant what I asked last night," he continued, "about real help." And the words settled between them, not heavy, not demanding, just present. And Ava held his gaze for a second longer, her expression unreadable, before giving a small nod. "Then I meant what I said," she replied, and for a moment, that was enough. No challenge, no test, just an understanding that neither of them needed to explain further. And as she walked away to place the order, she realized something had changed, not just in him, but in herself, because this time, she was not just reacting, not just defending. She was choosing to engage, carefully, cautiously, but willingly. And behind her, he watched her go, not with the curiosity of someone testing a theory, but with the quiet focus of someone who had already found what he was looking for and was now trying to understand what it meant. The evening moved forward with a quiet rhythm, but beneath it something deeper was building, something neither of them rushed. And when Ava returned with the soup, she placed it in front of him with the same steady care as before. But this time, she did not step away immediately. She lingered just long enough to feel the difference, to acknowledge that this was no longer just a transaction. And he noticed, of course he did, because he seemed to notice everything that mattered, even the things most people overlooked. And as he picked up the spoon, he spoke without looking up, his voice calm but certain. "I spent a long time thinking about what you said." And Ava crossed her arms lightly, not defensive, just grounding herself in the moment. "People usually do not," she replied, a faint edge of honesty slipping through, and that drew a small, almost amused breath from him. Not laughter, just recognition. "Most people are not used to being told no," he said, glancing up at her. "Especially not in the way you said it." And Ava held his gaze, steady, unflinching. "Then maybe they needed to hear it," she answered, and there it was again. That quiet tension that did not feel like conflict, but like something sharper, something real. And for a moment he simply watched her, like he was measuring the weight of her words against something only he could see. And then he set the spoon down, untouched, his focus shifting entirely to her now. "What if I told you," he began slowly, "that I could solve everything you are dealing with right now?" And Ava felt it instantly, that familiar pressure returning, not from the words themselves, but from what they implied. The ease, the shortcut, the answer wrapped in someone else's control. And she shook her head slightly before he could finish. "Then I would tell you that you are missing the point," she said, her voice calm but firm. And something flickered in his expression, not irritation, not offense, but something closer to acceptance, like this was the answer he had been expecting and hoping for at the same time. And he leaned back slightly, exhaling through a quiet breath. "You think I am trying to buy you," he said, not as a question, but as a reflection. And Ava did not hesitate. "I think you are used to fixing things with money," she replied. "And I am not something that needs to be fixed." And the words landed clean, direct, leaving no room for misunderstanding. And for a moment, the space between them held that truth without resistance, without deflection, and then, slowly, something changed in him again, deeper this time, like a shift that reached beyond surface reactions, beyond curiosity or testing, and into something more honest, more exposed. And he nodded once, deliberate, as if acknowledging something he could no longer ignore. "You are right," he said quietly, and Ava blinked, caught off guard by how easily the words came, by the lack of argument, the absence of control, and for the first time, she saw it clearly. He was not here to prove anything anymore, not to her, not to himself. He was here because something about her had challenged the way he understood the world, and he was not pushing back against it. He was listening, and that realization settled between them in a way that felt both unexpected and undeniable. And as the noise of the restaurant continued around them, plates clinking, voices rising and falling, Ava felt the tension ease just slightly, replaced by something quieter, something steadier, and when she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, not guarded, just real. "So what are you trying to do?" she asked, and he met her gaze without hesitation this time. No mask, no distance, just clarity. "I am trying to understand what cannot be bought," he said, and in that moment, Ava realized that whatever this was, whatever had started with a simple refusal, it had grown into something neither of them could walk away from unchanged. The moment lingered between them, quiet but undeniable, like something had finally settled into place, and Ava felt it in the way her shoulders relaxed just slightly, in the way she no longer felt the need to defend every word, every boundary, because for the first time, he was not pushing against them, he was standing beside them, trying to understand them, and that changed everything in a way she had not expected. And as she stepped back, giving him space to finish his meal, she realized that whatever this was, it was no longer about money. It was about something far more rare, something far more difficult to earn, and the rest of the evening passed with a quiet ease that felt unfamiliar but welcome. Their conversations no longer circling around tests or defenses, but moving into something more natural, small exchanges about ordinary things, about work, about the city, about the way people moved through life without really seeing each other. And yet beneath those simple words, something deeper continued to grow, something neither of them needed to name. And when the night finally drew to a close, when the last tables emptied and the lights dimmed slightly, Ava approached once more with the check, placing it gently in front of him. And this time, there was no hesitation, no lingering question, just a calm understanding that this moment would carry forward beyond the walls of the restaurant. And as he opened the folder and placed his card inside, he paused, then reached into his coat again, and for a brief second, Ava felt that familiar tension return, the memory of the cash, the unspoken test. But what he pulled out this time was not a stack of bills. It was a single folded note, worn at the edges, and he set it carefully on the table between them, not pushing it toward her, not offering it as a solution, just placing it there. "Do you remember this?" he asked, his voice steady, and Ava looked down, recognizing it instantly, the same bill he had offered before, the one she had refused without hesitation, and she met his gaze again, her expression calm but curious. "Yes," she said, and he nodded slightly, his eyes holding hers, with a clarity that had not been there before. "This was the moment," he said, "when I realized something I had forgotten." And Ava felt her breath slow, her attention sharpening, because whatever he was about to say, it mattered, not in the way money mattered, but in the way truth did. And he continued, his voice quiet but certain, "I have spent most of my life believing that if something mattered, it had a price, that everything could be solved, controlled, or earned with enough resources." And he glanced briefly at the note before looking back at her. "But you reminded me that some things only exist when they are not for sale." And the words settled between them, not heavy, not dramatic, just real, and Ava felt something shift inside her again, something softer this time, something that did not feel like defense or resistance, but like recognition, like she was being understood in a way that did not take anything from her. And he slid the note slightly closer, not as an offer, but as a symbol. "Keep it," he said, "not as money, but as a reminder that you were right." And Ava looked at it for a moment, then back at him, and for the first time, she did not feel the need to refuse, because this was not about control, not about obligation, it was about meaning, about respect given freely, without expectation, and she reached out, picking it up slowly, her fingers brushing the worn paper as if it carried more weight than it should. And when she looked up again, there was something new in her eyes, something unguarded but still strong. "Thank you," she said softly, and he nodded once, a small, genuine smile touching his lips, not the kind that tested or measured, but the kind that simply existed. And as he stood